The moment my husband stood before the judge and declared that I had spent my entire life living off his success without earning a single dollar, I realized the man I had loved for more than 3 decades had completely rewritten our history in his own mind. He spoke with such confidence that everyone in the courtroom seemed ready to believe him, yet he had no idea that the quiet woman sitting across from him had carefully protected a secret that would soon turn his greatest strength into his most humiliating defeat. My name is Evelyn Harper, and I was 58 years old when my marriage came crashing down inside a packed courthouse in the heart of Denver, Colorado, after a lifetime spent believing loyalty would always be stronger than ambition. Across the room sat my husband, Daniel Harper, dressed in an expensive charcoal suit with the same polished smile that had convinced investors, reporters, and business leaders that he alone had built one of the fastest growing transportation companies in the country. Only 8 months earlier, I had been planning a quiet anniversary vacation, believing our future would be filled with peaceful mornings and well-deserved retirement after years of sacrifice. But instead, a courier arrived at my front door carrying divorce papers and a cold letter demanding that I leave our home within 60 days. I later discovered that Daniel had secretly started a relationship with a much younger executive from his company, and together they had already begun planning a glamorous new life, while assuming I would quietly disappear without questioning anything. Most people who looked at me saw nothing more than a gentle homemaker who enjoyed gardening, cooking family dinners, and staying far away from corporate boardrooms. But that image existed only because I had deliberately chosen to remain behind the curtain while someone else stood in the spotlight. Long before I became a wife, I had earned a respected reputation as a financial strategist with an exceptional talent for solving impossible business problems, and giving up my own career had been a personal decision made out of love rather than weakness. When Daniel and I married 32 years earlier, his small delivery company was drowning in debt, struggling to pay employees, and only weeks away from permanent closure. So every evening after finishing household responsibilities, I quietly transformed our kitchen into a command center where I redesigned financial plans, negotiated supplier contracts, built expansion strategies, and created legal structures that slowly turned a failing business into a thriving national corporation. Daniel happily accepted every breakthrough while taking credit in public interviews, and because I believed our marriage was built on trust instead of recognition, I never imagined that one day he would stand before a judge and insist that I had never contributed anything at all. As the company grew beyond anything we had once imagined, the applause, magazine covers, and television interviews slowly changed Daniel into someone I barely recognized, because every compliment convinced him that he alone deserved the credit for our success. The humble man who once thanked me for every late night gradually disappeared, replaced by someone who believed the world revolved around his talent, while my years of sacrifice faded into the background like they had never existed. The first warning signs arrived quietly through unexplained business trips, late-night phone calls that ended the moment I entered the room, and a sudden distance that made our conversations feel more like meetings between strangers than moments shared by a married couple. Rather than confronting him with anger, I trusted my instincts and began reviewing financial records, knowing that numbers rarely lied, even when people did. What I uncovered shocked me far more than the affair itself, because hidden among dozens of complicated transactions were carefully disguised transfers moving millions of dollars through newly created companies registered under unfamiliar names. The pattern was unmistakable, and every document pointed toward a deliberate plan to reduce the value of our shared estate before the divorce so Daniel could walk away with nearly everything while leaving me with almost nothing. Instead of allowing panic to control me, I quietly contacted Nathan Collins, a respected corporate attorney who had once worked beside me during the earliest days of my financial career and who still remembered exactly how our business had been built from the ground up. After reviewing every contract, account statement, and corporate filing, Nathan looked at me with complete confidence and calmly explained that Daniel had overlooked one critical detail that could change everything if we handled the situation with patience and precision. Decades earlier, when our company was still fighting for survival, I had insisted that every valuable asset, every important trademark, and every piece of commercial property be protected through a carefully designed ownership structure that only a handful of trusted professionals fully understood. While Daniel believed those documents were nothing more than routine paperwork signed during the stressful early years of the business. I knew they contained legal protections that could expose his deception, safeguard everything we had built, and completely reverse the outcome he expected in court. The morning of the final court hearing arrived beneath a sky filled with dark clouds, and the heavy silence outside the courthouse matched the weight I carried inside my heart as I walked through the entrance beside Nathan with complete confidence hidden behind a calm expression. Daniel arrived several minutes later surrounded by an expensive legal team, greeting people with the same polished smile he had worn for years, completely convinced that the hearing would be nothing more than a formality before claiming everything for himself. As soon as the proceedings began, Daniel's attorney confidently presented a settlement proposal that offered me a small monthly allowance and a short deadline to leave the beautiful home where I had spent more than 3 decades building a family and supporting the business behind the scenes. He described me as a dependent spouse with no meaningful financial experience, insisting that I had never contributed anything beyond ordinary household duties and should simply accept the generous offer before the court wasted any more valuable time. I remained completely silent, refusing to react even as Daniel glanced toward me with a smug smile that suggested he believed I was finally accepting defeat after all these years of standing quietly beside him. Leaning slightly in my direction, he whispered that I should have accepted his private offer months earlier because once the judge ruled in his favor, I would walk away with even less than what had already been placed on the table. When Daniel was invited to speak, he confidently described himself as the sole architect of our success, explaining in dramatic detail how he had supposedly built every division of the company through his own determination while claiming I had simply enjoyed the rewards without making any real sacrifices. Every confident statement he made echoed through the courtroom, but with each sentence he unknowingly strengthened our position because his own testimony contradicted documents that had been legally recorded many years before. After Daniel finished speaking, Nathan calmly rose from his chair without showing the slightest sign of emotion and respectfully handed the judge a neatly organized collection of certified records, original corporate agreements, ownership filings, and decades of carefully preserved legal documents that told a very different story from the one Daniel had just described. The judge quietly reviewed each page with growing interest while the courtroom fell into complete silence, and for the first time that morning I noticed Daniel's confidence begin to fade as uncertainty slowly replaced the arrogance that had carried him into the courthouse. Several long minutes passed before the judge carefully placed the final document on the bench, removed his glasses and looked directly at Daniel and his attorney with an expression that immediately changed the atmosphere inside the courtroom. In a calm but unmistakably firm voice, he asked whether either of them had taken the time to verify who legally controlled the parent organization, the intellectual property, and the commercial buildings connected to the company they had spent the entire morning claiming belonged exclusively to Daniel. Daniel's attorney quickly insisted there had to be some misunderstanding because his client had served as chief executive for years and had always been presented publicly as the founder and owner of the business, but the confidence in his voice disappeared as the judge continued reviewing the evidence. The official records clearly showed that years earlier the company had been reorganized under a private family investment structure, and every major asset had been placed under my legal ownership through agreements that remained completely valid and fully enforceable. The courtroom became so quiet that every movement seemed unusually loud as the judge explained that Daniel had managed the company as an executive leader but had never personally owned the valuable assets that generated its enormous success: the headquarters, the distribution facilities, the registered trademarks, and the technology licenses were all protected under the ownership structure I had established decades earlier, leaving Daniel with authority to operate the business only as long as those legal agreements remained in place. Nathan then presented detailed financial evidence, showing that Daniel had secretly transferred company funds into hidden accounts through a network of outside businesses in an attempt to reduce the value of our shared estate before filing for divorce. Every transaction was supported by bank records, corporate filings, and electronic communications, making it impossible to dismiss the transfers as innocent mistakes because the pattern revealed careful planning over many months. Daniel suddenly lost the confidence that had filled the courtroom earlier that morning, and his face turned pale as he realized the carefully hidden scheme had completely fallen apart before the judge. His own attorney quietly urged him to stop speaking immediately because continuing the hearing could expose him to far more serious legal consequences than losing the divorce. And within moments the man who had arrived expecting total victory was desperately asking for an opportunity to negotiate a settlement before everything he had built around deception collapsed forever. Before the afternoon ended, both legal teams returned with a completely different attitude because the evidence left no realistic path for Daniel to continue fighting without risking devastating financial and legal consequences. He agreed to surrender every claim he had made against my personal assets, repay the money he had secretly diverted through hidden accounts, resign from his executive position, and accept full responsibility for the damage caused by his dishonest actions. The woman who had encouraged Daniel to abandon our marriage quickly disappeared from the picture after the truth became public, realizing that the glamorous future she had imagined had been built on false promises instead of real wealth. I walked away from the courtroom carrying something far more valuable than money because I had reclaimed my dignity, my confidence, and the peace that had been stolen from me during months of betrayal and uncertainty. Rather than remaining in the city surrounded by painful memories, I sold several business properties, stepped away from the company that had defined so much of my life, and settled in a quiet lakeside community where every sunrise reminded me that new beginnings often arrive after the darkest storms. Using the experience I had gained over 3 decades, I founded a consulting firm dedicated to helping entrepreneurs, especially women, protect their businesses, understand financial planning, and never allow their contributions to be overlooked. Looking back, I realized the greatest mistake Daniel ever made was believing that kindness meant weakness and that silence meant ignorance, because the strongest people often have no desire to prove themselves until circumstances leave them no other choice. My journey taught me that respect cannot survive where gratitude disappears, and that anyone who underestimates a loyal partner may eventually discover they were standing beside the true architect of their success. All along, if my story has taught you anything, I hope it is that your value is never determined by the opinions of people who benefit from ignoring your sacrifices, and that patience, wisdom, and quiet determination can overcome even the deepest betrayal when the truth finally comes to light. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.